Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Shred Gaming Technical video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to be starting things out with Nvidia and the GA104 graphics card, which of course will mean the GTX 2080 will indeed be launching fairly soon, meaning the GTX 1080 is essentially end of line. Get to that in a minute. Then we'll move over to AMD and a mysterious new AMD GPU which has been spotted in Syssoft Sandra database. Then we'll finish the video with Microsoft, specifically the launch of 5 distinctive SKUs. For around the $25 you'll be able to support lower end hardware that has, for example, 4GB of RAM or less, but for those looking to power high resolution displays with lots of memory, lots of processor cores, well, by golly gosh, you're going to be spending over $100. But we'll start out once again with Nvidia and the Ampere architecture, which is being touted to launch in April. So let's start things out with the GeForce GTX 2070 and 2080 cards, which are going to launch in April, at least according to these rumours. Furthermore, they will not be powered by Volta. Instead, we will see the introduction of Ampere. But we'll go into that in just a moment. Let's get a bit of backstory. So, currently, Pascal is almost 2 years old. It was first introduced with the GeForce GTX 1080 back in May of 2016, and since then the lineup of cards has sold extremely well, with even the extremely expensive GeForce GTX 1080 Ti absolutely stellar in performance, and despite, yes, the fact it has a price point, it's very hard to argue with the sheer performance of this damn card. Indeed, you can make a very compelling argument that if you own a GeForce GTX 1080 and you bought the thing on launch, you would be extremely happy with your purchase. After all, 4K is certainly very achievable with the card, especially with some concessions here or there, and if you don't mind the 60 FPS limit not being hit, for example, let's say you're happy around the 30 frames per second mark, well, by golly gosh, you can run pretty much any game under the sun at absolute full quality. In other words, the architecture has been very successful indeed. But the rumours are that the GP102, which is the same GPU which is found in the GTX 1080 Ti, has hit end of line, and it won't be too long before the GP104 also marks a similar state in Nvidia's lineup. So why is this? Well, imperative to realise that this is a rumour. This is not a confirmed leak. This is not, you know, one of the executives of Nvidia going on record and telling us this, but these rumours stem from 3D Center. Now, to be fair to the website, they have been fairly accurate in the past. Fairly accurate does not equate to always accurate, and it does not also equate to these rumours being 100% accurate. So even if the rumour is generally accurate, there may be a few details here or there which are not as accurate, and that is a lot of accurates. Regardless, the fact of the matter is that Nvidia are prepping to launch Ampere, and supposedly this is going to take place in April. Now, here's where things get a bit weird. The GPU itself, the GA104, is going to launch in April 2016, which means there are a couple of different events that we could possibly see these cards being demonstrated in. The first would be GDC, and the second is GTC, and those are both being held in March of this year. So there's a possibility that we may see an unveiling / launch in those dates, or Nvidia may do a live stream and then just say, hey, here's the GPU, and do that a couple of days before launch. So, you know, there are multiple options, assuming, once again, this is genuine. So, with the GP104 and other cards in the Pascal lineup, it is once again powered by the Pascal architecture, and we assumed that, for a long time anyway, that this was going to continue and we were going to see Nvidia's roadmap then transition to Volta. That does not appear to be the case. Volta has since launched, but Volta appears to be just for high performance computing. So we see, for example, a massive increase in performance for deep learning, FP64, NVLink, all of these other things were just ramped up ridiculously. Like with deep learning training, it's gone a 12 times increase. So from the P100, from 10 teraflops, it's gone to 120 teraflops. And some of this, of course, is with the introduction of the tensor cores, but still, you can kind of get where Nvidia were going with this design. It was essentially designed from the ground up for high performance computing. Therefore, according to folks over at Beyond 3D, Nvidia were preparing Ampere, and this is going to be the replacement for high-end Pascal cards. So there are 3 potential possibilities of what Ampere actually is. And I'm not saying it is one or it is the other. There are 3 potential possibilities. The first potential possibility is that Ampere is a refined version of Pascal. So in other words, they've tweaked it. They may have added a few additional CUDA cores. They may have increased memory bandwidth. They might have increased the clock speeds, the frequencies, whatever. But essentially, the underlying technology is similar. Now, if you really look at this, Maxwell to Pascal, there are some inherent differences in the architecture, but generally speaking, Maxwell to Pascal, there is certainly a lot of underlying technology which is the same. They basically, just as Nvidia would themselves say, crafted it for speed. They redesigned it to hit much higher clock speeds. Therefore, performance absolutely skyrocketed. The other possibility is that Ampere is a completely different design to Volta, but it is still very distinctive from that of Pascal. So what you could essentially say is that they're brothers, almost, they're siblings, but while there are some distinctive similarities between the 2 architectures, there is also quite a lot different. So if you were to kind of just do a dice shot of the 2, you'd be like, okay, I can kind of see where they're going. I mean, they're both GPUs and they've both got these technologies, but memory controller's different, the layout of the cores are different, the cache is different. I'm obviously just making stuff up here because we don't know yet, but you get the idea. The actual architecture is fundamentally similar in some aspects, but there is a lot of differences to perhaps make it cheaper or to just make it better for gaming. The other potential possibility is that Ampere is basically Volta, but just cost reduced and tweaked for gaming. So that would mean that the designs are a lot more similar. What you do have, however, is the reduction of parts of the die which are designed for deep learning, or FP64 performance has been cut drastically. Tensor cores, we can pretty much assume that they would be going bye-bye. You get the general gist. So in other words, the design, very similar in terms of the cache layout. Perhaps we might see a redesigned memory controller to allow it to run, let's say, GDDR6 or R5X or whatever they're running. But fundamentally, the architectures look kind of similar, but obviously one is just tweaked for the gaming loads, one's tweaked for more high-performance computing, and that's how they're going to separate the two architectures. So those 3 possibilities are definitely the 3 contenders that I can possibly think. Another obvious thing is that Ampere is not just going to be the GTX 2080 and the 2070, we're also going to see the 2060. We're assuming there's going to be the 2080 Ti eventually. Basically, Nvidia will slowly transition the entire lineup to this. Now, if these rumours are accurate, and I'm not saying they are accurate, the GPU 102 hit EOL, end of line, status at the beginning of November last year. So this means that any GTX 1080 Ti cards, which is, as you know, the flagship product, that are in existence are the only ones that are ever going to be in existence. I don't obviously know how many cards have ever been produced, but let's just say for the sake of argument, there's 1 million cards. There's never going to be 1,000,001 cards. So in short, if you want to buy a GTX 1080 Ti, well, here you go. Of course, this means you've got a choice to make. Do you buy a GTX 1080 Ti or do you go with Ampere? Logically, the GA104, and I'm just making an assumption here, is probably going to be about as fast as the GTX 1080 Ti. That's roughly what Nvidia have done in the past. They've basically said that the previous card is about as fast as the previous card of like the 980 or the 1080 was always as fast as about the Titan. So, for example, if you were to look at the GTX 1080 when it was launched, it was a little faster than the Titan X, which had been based upon Maxwell. How much faster obviously did depend upon the game. Sometimes it was just a few frames faster, sometimes it was about 10, 15, 20% faster, but it was faster. So we can presume, and once again I'm guessing here, this is not based upon official documentation, but we can assume that this particular card based upon Ampere is probably going to be a bit faster than the current ties. So you've got a bit of a choice to make. If you are believing these rumours, which I'm not saying they're true, but I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think it's going to be too long into the future anyway. Even if these rumours are not true, I don't think it's going to be too long before we actually see the 2080 series launch. You've got a bit of a choice. Do you buy a second GTX 1080 Ti, or do you just kind of not? Personally, if it were me, I would just not do it. I would probably, the moment these things are announced, I would just sell your card on eBay and pray to the gods that the miners take it. That's my personal opinion, of course. You're free to not do that. Okay, so on from one company to another company, and this one is the Athlon 200GE. Very slight aside, goodness, I have great fond memories of Athlons. Does anyone remember those back in the day? Not only was the Athlon 64 one of my favourite processors ever, I actually had a Venice, which was the Venice 3000 939 socket. Absolutely spiffy processor, I tell you. Yes, that thing ran 1.8 gigahertz, I believe, at default clock speeds, and I managed to get it to 2.7 gigahertz, and I'm not a professional overclocker by any stretch of the imagination, on a default cooler. It was absolutely mind-blowing how bloody awesome that architecture was. Absolutely ridiculous. And even the Bartons before that, absolutely amazing. So the Athlon has a wonderful place in my heart. But anyway, ComputerBase.de managed to spot a previously undiscovered processor on the Sysoft Sandra database, and this is once again known as the Athlon 200GE. It looks like it's essentially a Ryzen 3 2200U but pared down. It's a dual-core processor, so it does have SMT. That means it's got 4 threads total, which is reasonable for a lower performance processor nowadays, and it's running at 3.2 gigahertz clock rate, assuming it's being detected correctly, and this is not like an early engineering sample, that type of jazz. In terms of cache, it has 4 megabytes of level 3, but the interesting part to me is the fact that it does indeed have an integrated graphics chip, and that is based upon the Vega architecture, specifically Vega 3. Now this thing is going to be able to power through any game at 4K, because it has an abundance of computing power. It has 192 shaders. That's 3 compute units. Okay, maybe not anything at 4K, but for example, Quake 1 at 4K. Okay, I'm being a bit of an asshole, but still, my point is that for the purchase usage cases of this particular processor, which, let's face it, is office documents, 2-in-1 devices, that type of thing, this level of performance is absolutely fine. So now we're going to finish the video off with Windows 10, specifically a roadmap of consumer-focused SKUs. Now it is important to realise that Microsoft will supposedly offer discounts for OEMs or large bulk orders, so the prices we have here may not be indicative of final prices for, let's say, the Dells of the world, the ones who are purchasing not just a few dozen keys, but hundreds if not thousands of keys at a time. So there are several different SKUs which the website Thurrott.com, that is THURROTT, has discovered, and they have done so by once again reading confidential documents. Excuse me, by the way, I'm still not 100%, just getting over a rather nasty sinus infection. But anyway, so my brain is a bit mushy. But anyway, there are several distinctive SKUs, and they are the Entry, Value, Core, Core Plus, and Advanced. So they'll be on screen, but I'll go through a few of the basics here. So the entry levels are really aimed at the Celerons, the Pentiums, and perhaps even more so the Atom. That's 4GB of memory at most, less than a 32GB SSD, and a pretty small screen size, less than 14 inches, or tablets, that type of thing. The value is 4GB of memory, 64GB SSD, 14.1-inch screen, 500GB HDD, or a 64GB SSD can also be supported with this. And up to the advanced is a Core 9 or a Core 7 or Threadripper. 16GB or more is fine. An AMD FX, a Ryzen 7, a 4K screen resolution, any processor. Basically what you can see here is that I suspect the majority of you who are probably listening to this or watching this video, you're probably not too interested in any of them other than the advanced, and here's where it gets a bit sticky. So the entry level, which is $25, is obviously going to be out of the mindset of almost anyone, unless they're buying like a cheap 2-in-1 tablet to, for example, do a little bit of homework on, or perhaps watch Netflix on, or while they're on the train or whatever. It's really going to be the advanced model, advanced SKU that most people want to go for, and that's going to cost $101 US. And according to the author, there are a couple of other important things to take into consideration. The first is that Windows 10 S is pretty much going to be dying. So now Windows 10 S mode and baseline SKUs will be going away, and therefore each version will have an S mode. So what Microsoft are doing, if you really boil it down, is they're charging more money for a Windows 10 license, and that's based upon the hardware that you want. So in short, if you buy a lower end rig or lower end piece of hardware, you won't, in theory, need to spend so much on the OS. But on the other hand, if you're buying a really high-end performance PC, well, your cost is going to go up in kind. Now, apparently, these SKUs are going to start going on sale on April 2nd, with the Home Advanced going into effect on May the 1st. Finally, from what we're hearing, the device configuration in 2018, the company I'm going to read this verbatim, are pushing to set Edge as the default browser, installing the linked-in UWP app, pre-install Office, limiting app pin to one legacy Win32 app on the desktop, one legacy app on the taskbar and the start bar, and 25% Win32/75% Microsoft Store. Microsoft are pretty much leveraging their position as the platform holder of choice. And it's kind of weird because I've had a few discussions with people recently, and they've said, Paul, you're really into tech. You've obviously got Windows and Linux, right? And I just kind of look at them sheepishly like, yeah, no, actually I don't. And they say to me, why? Like, why the hell don't you have Linux? And it's not because I don't like the operating system. That's the issue. But here's the actual reality of how I personally work. And I know people are going to scream at me, but this is open source and that's open source. And I agree with you 100%. The problem is, I don't know those applications in many cases, and some applications there is no alternative. And also I do a lot of Windows gaming. Yes, I can run virtual machines. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can do this. The problem is, I just can't be bothered. And I know I'm going to probably get comments like, that's just lazy, but it's honestly true. Like, most of the time I'm video editing for 2, 3, 4 hours, and that's assuming it's a news video. News videos typically take about 2 hours to edit, if there's a lot of slides. If it's really big news video, and I'm also on camera, it can take 4 hours plus. And reviews can take a couple of days. And I'm not saying that as in, I'm really hard working. I'm simply saying that, I'm generally doing other stuff while editing. I'll usually edit for maybe a couple of hours, then I'll take a short break. I'll maybe play a game for half an hour, or maybe I'll need to do something else. Maybe I'll need another application. Maybe I'll have to do some client work, blah, 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 blah. The point is, I'm going to keep needing to switch applications a lot on my PC. So the problem is, if I, have to run virtual machines or whatever, it's essentially taking away resources from the applications I'm using. So the other option is I could have dual boot, but the problem with that, being quite frank with you, is it just means I keep needing to restart my PC, and I always grumble already with, the restarting, because I've got browser windows open, I've got documents open that I need to change. It's like, I just can't be bothered. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. It's not that they dislike Linux, it's just that Linux hasn't really cannibalized enough the market share, and it's kind of a catch-22 because, well, I think for gaming, really, Windows could have had a good competitor with the Steam OS, but it's just not really been pushed enough by Valve. And I'm not saying that bitterly. I'm not saying that I hate Valve or anything like that, but I do somewhat lament the fact that Valve didn't push SteamOS when it was launched. I think if they had have pushed it, if they'd have put marketing behind it, and they'd had developers push it and release decent SDKs and decent software to help developers. I'm not saying it didn't do any work, but if they had of, and to kind of support the Linux ecosystem, I'm not saying that Windows still wouldn't have had the largest market share when it came to the PC. Of course it would have, but maybe, just maybe at least, it would have had a prayer to kind of had some level of competition. But as it is, well, it is what it is. The one good thing, in reality, you as an end customer are probably not going to be paying these prices. They're probably going to be substantially cheaper because, once again, if you are buying pre-built PCs, or even buying them from the shop, you're going to be buying them in large quantities. Sorry, the vendor that's selling you those are going to be buying them in large quantities, so it's probable you're going to get them significantly cheaper. But it is worth noting. Anyway, with all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.